One of the fascinating aspects of the TV show Lost was the entity looming in the jungle, the unseen monster. In this analysis, I will go back to the start and explore the inspiration of it. I will focus on the perception the audience had to an entity we didn't even see until the end of the first season, yet still categorized as a character, an antagonistic force on the island. I will talk about how the writers managed to develop its intrigue in creative ways, from a gruesome unseen monster to a three-dimensional character, using the works of Professor Murray Smith, an influential figure in how the audience emotionally and cognitively engage with fictional characters, how we are active spectators when watching Lost, something he categorized into 3 different categories: recognition, alignment, and allegiance. I think the writer's approach to the monster was perfect, so let's get back to the beginning. The development of Lost has been fairly well covered as a Lloyd Braun idea of a castaway type of survival show that Jeffrey Lieber wrote. But the thing was just a linear basic survival story of plane crash survivors on an island. Lloyd Braun read it during the Christmas holidays of 2003 and it was a disaster. It needed to be fixed. Even the improved one by Lieber in the first week of January was bad. It wasn't until J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof were given the project the week after when they both agreed that this island should be incredibly mysterious. They were discussing ideas such as this unseen monster in the jungle. On their first meeting on January 12, 2004, it didn't have a name or anything. It was just listed as something really big moving through the trees in the distance, with descriptions of a horrifying noise wakes everyone up in the middle of the night and just as abruptly stops. It sounds like nothing any of them have ever heard before. And then later, Jack, seemingly our lead, dies violently and quickly, killed by something we catch just enough of a glimpse of to scare the living shit out of us. And even in the later outlines that were written in the same week, we don't get a lot more. It's more or less a sound, a noise, a thing. It's enormous, it's scary, and that everyone at the camp are convinced it's unnatural. Lloyd Braun, the head of ABC, was a little concerned about the introduction of the monster in the pilot, but the writers were convincing in their message. That the monster is a representative of the idea that the island is weird and supernatural, with a long history and mythology. Taking that out, it just becomes a normal crashed on an island story we've seen before. J.J. Abrams is a big fan of Steven Spielberg, and the monster's introduction is taken right out of Spielberg's playbook. The hidden antagonist with unclear motives or appearance. In Spielberg's own words, fear of the unknown is perhaps the greatest fear of all. And in his first feature film, we are introduced to a dangerous antagonist, a truck driver in Duel. For some reason, he's adamant on killing our protagonist. The truck driver is never seen, with the exception of a few limbs in some shots. He never says a word. All we get is the frightening image of the truck and the incredible sound design. You're on the edge of your seat the entire film. Spielberg also hides the antagonist pretty well in Jaws, with the exception of small glimpses. We don't really see it until the end. The murder in the beginning is terrifying by withholding the goofy looking shark, and a couple of decades later he does the same thing in the beginning of Jurassic Park. The opening with a velociraptor is brilliant. Obviously, Spielberg couldn't hide the dinosaurs, but there's a long time until we see them, and they are on screen for 14 minutes, in a movie over 2 hours. J.J. Abrams wasn't the only voice in the writer's room. There was a think tank of writers, all with different experiences, some in very hard sci-fi and comics, others in regular network television. In February 2004, before the camera started rolling on the pilot, the monster was discussed as the antagonistic force on the island, as well as tossing out the idea of pylons that it couldn't cross. The idea that they sold to the network was that the monster was originally man-made, created by the mysterious scientific corporation that were on the island in the past. It was very much inspired by the works of Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park and the sequel The Lost World, as well as many other stories revolving cautionary tales on science and technology. JJ even called the island Crichton Island. One of the inspirations was Crichton's most recent novel, Prey, another book about dangerous experiments, this time of a swarm of nanobots appearing as predatory clouds, killing wildlife. The network was worried about the show, and the writers had to sell it to them that quasi-rational explanations would come for the weird things they see, and that the monster was man-made. That it would be a specimen from a research project, internally suggested as a cloud of nanobots just like in Prey, that got out of control. If Lost had been 13 episodes long, this is probably what we would see. Even though the writers were more interested in the more supernatural aspect of the show, something we could see much later. Years later, when the show had an established mythology, Prey was brought up again in the Lost magazine. And no, they were not interested in doing that. But if you want a taste of something like that, you could look at another movie, one called Dark Island. Just beware, it's a small indie film with bad acting, and also it's not really good. It's quite bad. But it's fun how similar it is to Lost.
That's no bird, Ray.
It came out in 2010, after Lost was over, and has a very science-based outlook on the whole thing. It's about a group of people who end up on an island to find out what happened with a science expedition. Unfortunately, their boat becomes missing, and they are stranded there.
What the hell was that thing? What were they doing on this island, and what the hell are we really here for? Well, break out the flares. You're not telling me that we're stuck here?
They find one of the people there, but he has been infected by this mysterious sickness.
We have to get off this island.
Some sort of entity, and we see what has gotten a hold of him, and lo and behold, it looks like this. You know what? It's fun to see someone being so inspired by Lost that they literally just take the smoke monster and make it into something like this. I shouldn't be too harsh, it's a small indie production. I always champion smaller films, and they try their best, despite its bad acting and sound mixing. But I think the visual effects are decent. The smoke monster looks quite good here, when we look at the budget of this whole production. Considering that Lost was a long-running TV show, they couldn't show anything like this. They didn't introduce the monster in the pilot like they introduced it in the first act of Dark Island. They needed to withhold the monster for a little bit, but what we got were the same feelings described in the first outlines. We know it knocks out trees and makes some very haunting sounds, and later in the episode it kills. The idea of having an unnatural feel was also present. There was a deliberate choice in the sound design so that the viewer would debate whether or not it was mechanical or organical. In the original cut, it sounded too much like a dinosaur, so it was changed.
What was that?
That was weird, right?
Is that Vincent?
It's not Vincent.
Did anybody see that?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
This is also great food for the audience since we don't know a lot. We're not provided with a booklet or a monster biography online. We can only guess by what we hear, unless you ventured online and try to look for spoilers. You see, a spectator is a dynamic viewer. who uses their preconceived notion of what a narrative is and their previous experience with these types of stories. We suck up all the signs and create patterns. This is part of cognitive theory and called a schema, a pattern which allows the mind to organize and process the mass of sensory data it receives. Such patterns allow us to postulate outcomes. We're comprehending signs and combining them with our own imagination. So one of the first theories were pretty obvious. As early as the screening of Comic-Con in July 2004, a couple of months before the show officially premiered, they screened it for fans attending the con, and this was brought up.
So is it going to go more sci-fi or more character development? Is this going to be Survivor with raptors or what?
First off, I want to go on record as saying there are no dinosaurs on the island.
I'm not surprised that this was the first question, considering that Lost had our characters walk through Kualoa Ranch, which had this famous dinosaur scene from Jurassic Park. And with this iconic landscape, genre and threat being here, of course you would attach that to your imagination. The audience would use whatever they have in their head, connect it with the various cues provided in the pilot, make a direct connection with something they know from before, and apply it to the unknown on the show. This works the other way as well, since after Lost was over, people kept attaching Lost to things being filmed in Hawaii. Lost had to be very careful about its use, and even applied this to Hurley, which in many ways represented the audience.
Was it a dinosaur?
It wasn't a dinosaur.
You say you didn't see it.
I didn't.
So how do you know it wasn't a dinosaur?
Because dinosaurs are extinct.
Oh. Yeah.
One of the more interesting aspects of the monster soundscape is how it evolved between the original pilot and the final version that aired. In the first cut, Rose comments on the strange noise, and then she says that she's from the Bronx in New York.
That sound that it made, I keep thinking that there was something really familiar about it. Really? Where are you from? The Bronx. Talking monkeys.
Later, during post-production, the ticka-ticka sound were added, sounds taken from New York taxicabs. But in the original pilot, her line was already there.
That sound that it made, I keep thinking that there was something really familiar about it. Really? Where are you from? The Bronx.
Before those effects were included. So this means her interpretation wasn't actually based on the taxi-like noises at all. Instead, it highlights the writer's intention. The monster's sound was always meant to feel unsettling and unnatural, something that didn't quite belong to an animal. But it is fun that the audience connects those two things together now. After the pilot, we didn't even hear from it until Walkabout, and then it was gone for a while. And here I want to add a little bit about Murray Smith's reflections on the character and his structure of Sympathy, the spectator and the characters. Would the monster fit into Smith's structure of Sympathy? Before we move on to the first layer, recognition, we also have a sublayer that exists outside, autonomic reactions. These are involuntary reactions and can be applied to characters. The most common are tense situations or jump scares. In a horror film, when someone knocks on the door, then that is a reaction to that, done by a character, which in many cases is completely unknown to us. Before we learn anything about the monster, it does create autonomic reactions. It frightens us, it scares us. It's a direct body reaction. There is a second layer, which is empathy, even though it is also tied and referenced into the other categories, but this is merely the outside perspective, where we have no clue who the characters are. Just an example. Consider the situation where you turn on the news and see a hurt child crying in a war zone. You don't know them, but you get an instant emotional reaction. It directly goes to your brain and you might cry seeing those brutal images. It's not part of this analysis though, and there is also more deeper layers Smith talks about in this category, but it's also not something necessary to focus on regarding the monster, or else this analysis would be 3 hours long. Smith says that the first layer in character engagement is the simplest one, recognition, what a character looks like. The process of identifying the monster as a character comes with limitations, since we only have the sound to go off and a certain sense of scale. that trees are uprooted and pushed down. Despite it not being on screen, we still pay more attention to it than, let's see, a background character who is on screen. Background characters are, in Smith's terms, figures that are not individuated. Technically, we know much more about this person than the monster. We know that they are human, how they look like, their gender, that they are a survivor of a plane crash. But this person is not a narrative agent. The monster is an active narrative agent with a distinct set of audio cues. This means a character that produces an effect on the story. The monster is introduced at the perfect time because everything has been quiet for the entire day. The camera makes sure that we recognize every single being, all of them are human, there's no aliens or anything like that, and the survivors are doing what they can to get rescued. Jack and Kate talk about going to the cockpit to find a transceiver. Kate knows where she saw the smoke coming from the cockpit, so we have characters with a motivation to get rescued. They have a plan and they have a destination. But then a monster is introduced that poses a problem they have to face. This is a conflict. Let's say that during this nighttime gathering the characters had heard strange monstrous sounds coming from the sea. We wouldn't feel any tension since it's a problem we don't have to face to get from point A to point B. The monster in the sea wouldn't affect the plot or create the conflict. The term narrative agent sounds very human, but you don't have to be a human to be part of Smith's structure of sympathy. Many non-humans are individuated and narrative agents. They affect the plot. Heck, you don't even have to be alive to be it, or even have any lines. We can also do a comparison with something the opposite, which is Wilson, the volleyball from Castaway. I'm about to spoil the film for you, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear more. But that's the opposite situation of the monster, where we have something we see and recognize, but it doesn't provide any audio. It's the way that Tom Hanks' character is talking to it and engages with it that takes it even further than a simple volleyball. It externalizes his loneliness and provides a channel for his thoughts. He recognizes it as a character, and through the acting and presence of the volleyball, we go a step beyond and feel for it. When Wilson drifts away and is lost at sea, but we're not there yet with the smoke monster. So despite the writers having a lot of information on the monster, we are only given the small breadcrumbs. We still put a lot of importance to it, and boy did we create millions of theories, and we're dying to know more about it. One of the writers, Javi Guijo-Marxwatch, was active on the internet message board The Fuselage, and when asked about the monster, he simply said, "The most widely accepted theory is that he either is or is played by David Fury." In the spoiler sections of various forums during late fall 2004, fans learned via Crichton from E that the smoke monster was unlikely to appear until the February sweeps. She is referring to the episode Hearts and Minds, which was aired slightly earlier in January 2005. Prior to this, however, on November 9th, 2004, Paul Dini, one of the original think tank writers, gave an interview that shed additional light on the show's antagonist. The monster is sort of a reflection of yourself. The pilot saw it in horror, and he was killed because he feared the monster. Locke saw the monster with true awe, therefore he was able to survive his encounter, Dini said. Though we may never see the entire monster, Dini says it may be a Loch Ness monster kind of thing. Almost 20 years later, Damon Lindelof confirmed this in an interview.
For a period of time, and I can't quantify it, I would say like maybe 3 or 4 months during season 1, that was the plan on which we were operating. I think that the two ideas that I remember feeling very prevalent was the forbidden planet idea, which is that the monster was a manifestation of the id. So it took like different people saw it as reflections of their own subconscious. So when Locke looked at it, he saw something incredibly beautiful, but when Jack looked at it, he saw his dead father. But like in terms of what, I will say this, there was an incredible, very real pressure from the network and the studio that to to say over and over again that Lost was not a supernatural sci-fi show.
The movie Forbidden Planet is a fascinating connection. It's about a starship that goes to a distant planet to find out what happened to the crew that visited this place 20 years ago. They meet one of the original expedition scientists, Dr. Morbius, who shows them around.
My co-workers were torn literally limb from limb.
By what?
By some devilish thing that never once showed itself.
This planet was inhabited by the Krell, an advanced alien species who died out. They could give physical form and life to their subconscious, more specific, their id. Here's a scene where Morbius shows the machine designed by the Krell that can project it on a smaller scale.
But it's alive.
Because my daughter is alive in my brain from microsecond to microsecond, while I manipulate.
On the planet there is a master of the id, who roams around. It is invisible, but it's enormous and frightening.
There it comes.
At one point the ship's crew set up a force field and try to blast it and then will able to see it. What Paul Dini says is very interesting. Did they consider that the monster was somewhat invisible and could appear in some form at will for certain characters? It's very fascinating, and the fans kept thinking about whether or not the monster was connected to the visions and dreams of our characters. They kept asking about the monster. Some could also add in comparisons with the TV show Twin Peaks, which was of great inspiration to Lost. The main antagonist there is Bob, an entity who feeds on pain and sorrow. David Lynch called him an abstraction in human form. Could this be a part of the answer? After New Year's 2005, showrunner Damon Lindelof reassured the fans. I think it's a Dave-Maddie issue, which is the audience thinks that they want Dave and Maddie to hook up, but once they do, you're like, I wish they never hooked up. So despite all the people who are saying, we want to see the monster, we want to know what Kate did, you must answer all these questions. We're comfortable just knowing the answers and holding them back until we've earned it, or until we've introduced mysteries that are even more compelling than those. At least that's the juggling act. Eventually everyone's gonna get really frustrated, but there's a reason why they didn't show Alien in the first reel of Alien, or the shark in Jaws. You'll learn when our characters learn. In April 2005, Crichton from E! As well as ABC teased that the monster would finally return in the season 1 finale, and in May, the showrunners themselves said this: "You'll see at least 2% of the monster, potentially 5%, which is good. That would be like seeing the toes if it had toes." And earlier that week, Evangeline Lilly appeared on Regis and Kelly and said we would get a glimpse of the monster in the finale. I was thoroughly surprised by this. We might see it, but we don't understand it. This is fun, just like when we opened the hatch. If it would have been a storage area or another simpler answer, it would be a disappointment. This one delivered with more intrigue and mystery. We didn't fully understand it until orientation, and then again we were left with more questions that got us glued into the show.
Throw it in! Now, Kate!
This sequence was so awesome. A weird wisp of smoke had taken John Locke down into a hole. It goes by so quickly, but it's showing what the monster looks like. It still keeps it a mystery. Some fans even thought that it went into Jack's ear, and others thought that they saw faces in the clouds. Whatever it was, we were theorizing on it for the rest of the summer. It wasn't until the 23rd Psalm that much of the TV audience fully accepted that the monster was in fact black smoke. The season finale had left things more ambiguous, raising the question of whether smoke was a byproduct of the monster, or if it was merely something it emitted while the creature itself was mechanical in nature. I shared this uncertainty at the time, especially given the showrunner's own comments. If what we saw on screen represented only 5% of the monster, then perhaps it was part of something larger and far more complex. The summer between season 1 and 2 gave them a lot of room for planning ahead and recontextualizing the mythology. Fun thing is that when this episode aired, my immediate thought was on a children's story, namely the Moomins. A mystical phenomenon happens after they throw in eggshells into a wizard's hat, and it creates some mystical pink floating clouds. Moomin also jumps into this hat, but he's turned into a monster. But he becomes his old self after his mother's love. Anyway, at this point in time, we can argue whether or not we understand the monster's motivations, whether or not we are finally getting into his mind when it decided not to kill Echo. We've now moved over to this field, alignment. Alignment describes the process by which spectators are placed in relation to characters, in terms of access to their actions, and to what they know and feel. But it doesn't have to be that we identify with the character. We still know too little, but Smith's structure of alignment has a few subgroups: subjective access, the spatio-temporal attachment, and perceptual alignment, aka point of view shots. Let's focus on the last one. This is what we mostly get from the monster in the beginning, the point of view of the monster. It has a different effect in drawing us into the subjectivity of a character, because it gives us information on what the character is paying attention to, while it chases our characters, or looks at John Locke. If the monster had glazed past Locke in this scene and perhaps focused on something else, that would tell us something about its thought process and interest. And also there's no filters or anything like we see with a Terminator. But we see that it is interested in John Locke. But there is no voiceover, we are not inside the monster's head, and can't really identify with it. We don't know what happens. We know very little. Smith argues that we cannot fully place point of view shots in the subjective axis category due to its limitations. It's the same thing with horror movies where the perpetrator is concealed. Even though we are inside their head, we might not fully understand their thought process. Just like in John Carpenter's Halloween, it conceals the identity of the looker. But it's interesting that Lost uses the point of view shot for the monster a lot. The 23rd Psalm is quite groundbreaking because it does something quite unique when it comes to the monster in this scene, with the flashing images inside the cloud. The spectator gets a sense of a thought process. Just like the spectator, the monster is picking up information from a character through the character's flashbacks, their memories. It's the most intimate access we've had to the monster's minds.
You know, it's an Easter egg for the fans who are really diehards about the show. You can go back, you can, freeze that on your TiVo, and you can look at that frame by frame, and you'll see all sorts of images from Echo's past. And what we wanted to do was not just include images from what you'd seen on the series, but also some images from his life that you had not yet seen on the series, just to sort of, tantalize the audience a little bit about what some other Echo stories might be. So there's a picture of a young woman with a headdress.
There's a couple, an older couple.
This episode made a lot of the spoiler fans extremely happy, and some even worried. Will the monster still be interesting now that we know what it looks like? Season 3. The monster appears again in The Cost of Living, and Lost does something quite fascinating here.
Are you ready, Echo?
The monster was Yemi. Now we have to go back to the drawing board again. Our basic level of character engagement recognition is dependent on consistency. We construct an image of the character as a continuous whole. A piece of fiction can adjust it a little bit, for instance if another character plays the same role. If it takes place over time, you can use cue for the audience that this is the same character, only played by a child actor. The spectator accepts that this is the same character despite the different actors. But Lost deconstructs the iconic physical appearance of the monster by adding Yemi here. It confirms a lot of suspicions that it can take human form. Although we don't see the smoke monster transforming to Yemi or vice versa, the editing and the story does the trick for us. The spectator is once again a detective and pieces together the clues to the appearance of the monster. The show gives us a little bit more for each appearance of the monster throughout the show. Since we have a clear understanding of recognizing and aligning the monster, we are suddenly introduced to this scene. The show adds in the monster's sound effect here, but we don't see it. So does this mean that it appeared as the Medusa spider? And suddenly you have fans bringing up Kate's horse, Christian Shepherd, Dave, Walt's cryptic appearance, Nadia the cat, the hurlybird, and so on. The showrunners did a podcast about this, but it's also pretty old, so we don't know if they changed their mind on anything, and they're obviously joking about it when they mention the hurlybird.
You're gonna say the name and I say monster, apparition, or
human,
or
dead,
human.
whatever,
Okay.
whatever its significance.
It's
Okay?
just
So,
word association.
Word association.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Ben's mother, Emily.
Apparition.
The wild boar of Sawyer.
Animal.
Spider that paralyzed Nikki.
Monster.
Bird of Hurley.
Oh, I'm not gonna comment on that.
Dave.
Figment of imagination / apparition.
Okay. Yemi.
Monster.
Walt.
Walt, the person, is a person, but there are apparitions of Walt that may not be Walt, and also monster related.
Excellent.
On the undead duo, there's only 3 pictures. One of them is
Christian Shepherd.
One of them is Christian Shepherd. One of them is Yemi, and the other one is
Kate's horse.
Kate's horse. Just a picture of a horse.
So Kate's horse is
undead.
Okay, thank you. That was good. Very well done.
By the time we see it again in Left Behind, we once again align with the monster. We follow the character's actions. It is consistent with what we know. It is basically what alignment is, a descriptive process. Once again using the point of view shot when it approaches the characters and chooses not to attack them. And this episode also showing us its weakness. In season 4 we continue in the same path, learning more, yet we're still acting as detectives, regarding its ability to take the shape of others, and whether or not the mystical appearances are all related to the monster, or if some are. I am impressed that Lost can be in its 4th season, yet we still haven't gotten tired of the monster. We constantly learn new information on it, and the mystery hasn't been punctured in any way. By now we've realized that it has a larger and mythological origin, through the chamber Ben opened. Even though people were doing biblical analysis way back in season 1, we started to get more references to older supernatural beings. The jinn is an obvious clue. The genies we see in Arabian culture, also popularized in the West, are supernatural beings who can take the form of animals and humans, and who can be summoned to a character's aid. Like in this episode, we connected with ash circles from folklore, which can be used to trap spirits within or keep spirits out. Lost loves its references to philosophy and religion, and the cabin represents a horror trope rooted in folklore. In my episode on The Economist, I mentioned how the Circle of Ash resembled a hisar, a circle that would keep out the jinn. But protective circles exist in many cultures and is a common trope in fantasy. One example, in Eastern Europe, you have the circle that is drawn to keep out the witch, as illustrated here in VE. On the Blaster map we get references to Cerberus, the guard dog of the underworld from Greek mythology, and we've already had a lot of Hindu and Egyptian mythology in the mix. In season 5 we see much more, with the tunnels and that Anubis is summoning what looks like a smoke monster, so the tapestry in history is so much richer. One thing that a lot of fans were confused by was the VFX. It seems like the appearance of the monster changed. Was this intentional? Probably not. Lots of visual effects artists said that there was a lot of trial and error with the monster. And additionally, the show went through different VFX companies. In season 3 they created the monster in the program Lightwave, but for season 6 there was a different VFX company called Look FX, and they did it in Maya. Even though many of the same crew members were present for season 2 as for season 4, there's still changes and programs evolve, and there's so little time to do the VFX on Lost.
So, I'd like to talk about the visual effects for Lost a little bit. One of the things I want to talk about in this presentation is the difference between working on a feature film and working on episodic television. In episodic the feature film, let's say, if you're lucky, you have the time and the budget to be able to get done what you want to get done, artistically, all that stuff. In episodic television, you never have those luxuries, ever. Lost is one of the biggest television shows ever, and I was still battling with budgets and time constraints every day. Typically, we would shoot an episode in about 2 weeks. It would go through about a week of editing, and they would hand over the plates to us, and we would have about a week and a half, 2 weeks to finish all the effects for a particular episode. So when they asked what would you do differently, it's a tough question because artistically I'd like to do a heck of a lot of things, but knowing the time constraints and the budget constraints, you can't do that. And one of the major things we tried to tackle was the character of the smoke monster. The evolution of the smoke monster. Smokey, as we call him, is one of the most fantastic effects the show did. It's this dark, mysterious black cloud that would come into the jungle and kill things, pretty much. It's all it did for the first 5 seasons, was kill people. And it was we knew it was going to be the most challenging aspect of working on this show. Because originally, Smokey was done in Lightwave and composited in After Effects. Now, Look Effects is primarily on Maya House, and we do most of our compositing in Shake, Nuke, and Flame. So instead of buying new programs and hiring new artists, we wanted to kind of reverse engineer the smoke monster into our own pipeline. So throughout that process, we just started brainstorming ideas. We took it into Maya, and basically the concept of the smoke monster is fairly simple. It's a animated bone chain with particle emitters attached to it to create this smoky texture type thing. So you could then animate it like you would a snake. So the concept is pretty simple, but in execution it became more complex. So this is some photography I did of this location that we knew the first episode Smoke Monster Battle was going to take place. This is in the character Jacob's lair, if you will. And so we started doing these tests for Smokey, and this is pretty rough. You can see that there's not a lot of cohesiveness to the smoke textures. There's actually some parts of the smoke that's kind of drifting away from the smoke monster, which ended up being a render error. But the producers liked it so much, we had to come back and figure out how to do it for real. This next one got a little bit closer to where we were toward the end. We proved that we could animate Smokey fairly well. We got those wispy little smoke particles coming off. At this point, it wasn't a render error anymore. This is actually intentional. And we just basically got our heads wrapped around Smokey a little bit more. So this next one, this got a little bit closer to what the final Smokey was going to look like. We had him come in, his textures would move faster as he got closer, and he shot out a tendril that didn't fall apart completely.
So I understand the concern. Should it be blacker, but then we won't see it against the dark backdrop? Should it have a more mist-like texture as we saw in season 1 or 2? Or the more cloud-like texture that has more weight and might be more believable in picking up characters? I must give credit to Dark Island. I think their smoke monster looks quite good considering their budget. Co-executive producer Jean Higgins mentioned on the Hatch podcast that she wasn't 100% satisfied with the look of the monster. I can understand her. Despite the differences, the fans still concluded that all of these were still the same character. Before we continue the next step, I need to talk a little bit about John Locke. Locke is a well-rounded and complicated character, one we have a strong sense of character engagement in, being one of the most prolific and important ones of the entire show. It checks out all the boxes. He's consistent in his appearance. We see his entire life from start to finish. He has a subjective axis through his story and terrific acting, and it's highlighted through his musical themes. Some relate to tragedy and his sad life, and some are related to destiny. The soundtrack does a terrific job in communicating thoughts, feelings and moods, which is perfectly illustrated in this channel. So when Crocodile Locke hits in the brig, we feel the adventurous side of John Locke. If they had played Locked out again, we would get the sense that Locke is not satisfied with his father being dead and he feels depressed yet again. But on a more clear way, we get subjective access through a character's acting, and this is not something we're able to see in the Smoke Monster since it has no visible expressions, and we only get his acting through confirmed monster appearances as humans, which are not that many at this point in time. Additionally, with John Locke, we are completely swept into this category, allegiance. Let me just clarify the differences between them all. Recognition is the basic level, recognizing someone or something as a character. We use our knowledge and project it onto others. Something in the distance might seem like a tree or a pillar, but then it approaches us and we recognize it as a human. If we see a human, we assume it is not made out of jello or alien unless we're told so in the story. Alignment gives us an understanding of the mechanics of the characters. It's also surface level since we're just comprehending signs and cues to determine what makes someone tick. Their skills, their language, and so on. What we see and hear surrounding our characters. The spatio-temporal attachment is just how the story follows the various characters. One good example in Lost would be the scene where Jin comes home with blood on his hands. In House of the Rising Sun, we are attached to Sun and see how she perceives this situation. In the episode In Translation, we are attached to Jin and see how this situation has a much different color than the other episode. The subjective axis is related to this too, and it is much easier in a long-running TV show since we spend more time with the characters, as well as adding in flashbacks, we simply learn much more. Acting is a way to get subjective access and their personalities, human expressions. We can't see that on the Smoke Monster unless we see it in human form. And one of the first instances was Yemi being angry at Echo for his final choice.
You speak to me as if I were your brother. Who are you?
There's more characters than Yemi. We immediately realize that this is Alex because she looks and talks like Tanya Raimonda, the actress, but the alignment shifts to the monster as soon as she pushes him to the wall. That is because we've received cues that the monster scanned Ben seconds prior to this, and also she speaks to him in a manner we've never heard her before.
And I want you to know that if you so much as touch him, I will hunt you down and destroy you.
Therefore, we use this data to form a conclusion that this is the monster speaking as Alex. He did the same thing with Christian Shepherd earlier in the show, but we still recognize and align this character as Christian Shepherd because this is what he has told us. It isn't until we are on a rewatch when we re-evaluate his character, because the revelation that this is the Man in Black doesn't come in the episode Cabin Fever or in any of the episodes with the actor John Terry. It comes near the end of the series in season 6.
I chased my father through the jungle, my dead father. Was that you?
Yes, that was me.
So contrary to the cost of living and Dead is Dead, when the audience receives the data about the characters being the same, this person is the monster, we don't get the same access to Crichton until much later. But then you also have allegiance, which is not the same thing as alignment. Alignment is access to characters, while allegiance is our moral evaluation with characters, where our hearts are in relation to them. Recognition and alignment require only that the spectator understand that these traits and mental states make up the character. With allegiance, we go beyond understanding by evaluating and responding emotionally to the traits and emotions of the character in the context of the narrative situation. John Locke is recognized in the pilot, and we follow his character in the next episode. Although we don't know his background, we can access his skills and personality. But it is in Walkabout where we get deeply emotionally connected to him. We sympathize with him, putting ourselves in the same shoes as being bullied by his boss, being let down by Helen, or being denied his wish to be on a walkabout, coupled with a sense of joy and wish fulfillment that he can finally walk again. A spectator can form an allegiance with a character and therefore consider them their favorite in the show. That happened with so many after this episode. These things can shift over time when characters do choices we don't agree with. And it's not like your favorite character has to be one you morally agree with or vice versa. This is why this structure of a character engagement is so interesting in terms of villainous characters. For instance, Walter White in Breaking Bad is one we deeply sympathize with in the beginning. A sad character who is told he has lung cancer, who we are allied with for a long time, but our allegiance with him becomes more problematic due to his actions later in the show. Several viewers feel a shift in allegiance towards Jesse Pinkman, who we thought little of in the beginning. Yet we're still fascinated by Walter White's transformation, even though we can't put ourselves in his shoes. This is why it's so interesting to discuss where our sympathy is in terms of Lost, because some had mixed feelings on Locke, yet we had much more allegiance to him rather than the more villainous characters. So what does Lost do at the end of season 5? It weaponizes the structure of sympathy. It turns everything upside down, because in season 5 it is revealed that the John Locke we knew from episode 7 up to the finale was an imposter. He was the smoke monster and we were all duped. The only difference with Locke is that he's much more confident, but we're still fooled since it's played by Terry O'Quinn. He's not voiced by Titus Welliver. He has the same skills. It fits into Locke's identity and story, and even the music suggests it's Locke.
I brought dinner.
John?
Hello, Richard. It's been a while.
And our allegiance is destabilized. All the sympathy and trust built up for Locke collapses once we realize it was a villain who used his appearance. It's a gut punch because we've been following Locke's quest for answers, and seeing him put Ben in his place is harkening back to several seasons of character development for Locke. So when the show reveals we've been projecting those sympathies onto an imposter, it breaks our heart for him, but not for the monster. The Man in Black has stolen not just Locke's body, but our emotional investment in him. We now roll onto the final season, and a very interesting thing has happened. The term allegiance has worked splendidly for us, the spectator creating this enormous gallery of favorite characters. People we cheer on that we can sympathize with, but also villains that we don't agree with, but we still want to succeed and develop. The spectator is not the only one with a gaze. That's been one of the most defining traits of the monster, that it can pass some sort of judgment, that just like the audience who has scenes from the TV show Lost, the monster also records sequences from the lives of the characters, scenes we remember from Lost, and now we've learned so much about the smoke monster, the show makes a strong frame of mind.
What are you? I'm not a what, Ben, I'm a who. You're the monster. Let's not resort to name-calling.
The show has always been about characters, and very often when a mystery has been introduced, the answer has something to do with characters. The discovery of the hatch would not be as fascinating without Desmond. All of those stories in the time flashes, they were done through our main cast survivors. Even the backstory of the Black Rock had to include a character we know from the main cast. But with the monster, our allegiance is very questionable since we're not sure if we stand with him or not. His actions are villainous, but the ambiguity around his origin, whether or not he is trapped as a spirit or that he is wronged by Jacob, it complicates our moral judgment. And this is also highlighted by his lack of name. It makes him much more alluring, just like the most famous anti-hero from the Western genre, the Man with No Name. Clint Eastwood's iconic figure from Sergio Leone's $3 trilogy. The Man with No Name makes us invested. What's his motivation? What makes him tick? What's his backstory? Obviously his mother gave him a name, and he grew up with a name, but the audience doesn't know, and that works in the favor of the story and the importance of the character. But the Man in Black's lack of name de-individualizes him. Lacking a stable identity, he stays elusive.
Long time ago, before I looked like this, I had a mother just like everyone. She was a very disturbed woman. And as a result of that, I had some growing pains.
The spectator has to continually use their schemata, continually reassess their ways of identifying with him. He's always clouded in ambiguity, and he illustrates it perfectly in Abaterno. The lack of name is intriguing. Season 6 is building up the Man in Black as a fully formed character. He has almost the most screen time, is in every episode except 2, and develop our preconceived notion of him as a monster. We keep going back and forth between our allegiance with him. Since we had so much sympathy and trust built up for Locke, many of us are wondering through the season whether or not Locke's soul will take over the master. A popular theory back in the day was that one of the reasons for including the Flash Sideways was to use this other dimension into hijacking our original timeline, that our Flash Sideways Locke would take over Man in Black Locke. This is yet another situation which we can try to connect it with Twin Peaks and Bob, the idea of a host body and an unseen spirit. However, that was not the case. It also messes with our head that everyone keeps calling him Locke and he reacts to it as if it's his name. Even jokes about memories of Locke despite being an imposter.
Desmond, going down into a hole in the ground? If there was a button down there to push, we could fight about whether or not to push it. We just like old times.
You're not John Locke. You disrespect his memory by wearing his face, but you're nothing like him.
However, we have a clear alignment since he is consistent. This is established by Ilana, saying that he is stuck as Locke, and early on we learn of his plan and motivations, and they continue throughout the entire season to gather up all the characters and find a loophole or a way for them to kill each other. And then the show does something different. After we've seen his heinous act, where several of our most beloved characters are killed due to his devilish plan, we get a standalone episode without any of them. The spectator's structure of sympathy is started from scratch yet again. Here we are introduced to a young boy who will later turn into the antagonist of the show, but as a standalone episode, we have the most sympathy with the Man in Black. Just like John Locke and many other characters on the island, he is a victim of a cruel parent figure. They even structure across the sea around him as the active narrative agent. Jacob is the passive one, the boy who doesn't want any change, while his brother has a lot of admirable skills and talent and is presented a mission. We want him to succeed. He's the one who takes charge and steps over the threshold to join with the other people on the island to find a way home. He's been given a lot of traits we've seen in many other heroic characters on the show already, and his desire to find a way off the island has been the driving force of our main cast heroes. So the audience sympathy is very skewed. Many fans have argued whether or not Across the Sea should have been aired earlier, for instance right after Abaterno. I can understand this thought because we have a lot of conflicting emotions on where we stand by the end of this episode. If you want to hear more about the Man in Black and his transformation, I would advise you to check out this trilogy of episodes, particularly the middle part which goes in depth in Across the Sea. I also have a bunch of other episodes dealing with the Man in Black and his appearances. It's all here on the YouTube channel. At the end, we learn how the smoke monster was created and how it was defeated. By removing everything that made it scary, enormous, unnatural, those intriguing concepts in the pilot, and reduce him to a human. He no longer looks down at Locke from above, a weak and frail man. Now he is human, while Jack has the high ground. The man who has been granted supernatural powers, being the protector of the island, is now looking down on the frail old man. The monster is not defeated by turning off a system or a force field or anything like that. He is defeated in the most human way, by blunt force and gunshot. He is defeated by the same people who were interrupted during their talk at the beach, by those who were chased by it in the jungle the following day. It's incredible that one thing that was simply described as a horrifying noise in the jungle turned into such a complex character.
Before I was trapped, I was a man, James, just like you.
I have a hard time believing that.
Well, you can believe whatever you want, but that's the truth. I know what it's like to feel joy, to feel pain, anger, fear, to experience betrayal. I know what it's like to lose someone you love.
I think the show plays with recognition, alignment, and allegiance in unusually unstable ways. And I think the monster is a fascinating example of the spectator's constant re-evaluation of it. I think Lost succeeded by making an incredible and rich antagonist.